Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into an exclusive analysis by the Security Nexus LLC titled The Threshold Trap. We're looking at a huge issue in global security right now: how exactly we should be interpreting the rising tide of Russian gray zone incidents across Europe. We're taking a strictly nonpartisan, clear-eyed look at the data to ask a really tough question. Is our conventional wisdom about these threats actually leading us astray? Let's get right into it. 151. According to the Congressional Research Service, that is the number of Russian hybrid incidents recorded across Europe since February of 2022. We're talking everything from suspected cyber operations and massive disinformation campaigns to drone incursions and outright infrastructure sabotage. I mean, when you see a number like that, it's practically impossible to ignore, right? It absolutely demands our attention. Because we aren't just seeing a steady trickle of incidents here, we are looking at an exponential surge. The incident rate roughly quadrupled from year 1 to year 2 and then nearly tripled again in year 3. And look, this kind of terrifying surge in the data is sparking genuine panic across European capitals. It's fueling this dominant but, as we'll see, potentially false narrative that NATO's deterrence is fundamentally failing. Which brings us to Section 1, the paradigm shift, reframing the threshold trap. So what if reading that data as a failure of deterrence is actually entirely backwards? The Security Nexus LLC argues that if we just count these incidents, we are falling right into what they call the threshold trap. To understand this, we really need a conceptual contrast. On one side, we have the sheer chaotic volume of incidents happening below the threshold of armed conflict. It's loud, it's disruptive, and yeah, it's increasing. But on the other side, we have something far more critical, and that is threshold integrity. This represents the unbroken red line of an Article 5 response. The core argument here is that the chaotic noise below the threshold is actually far less important than the unbroken integrity above it. Section 2. Understanding the gray zone. To truly grasp why that threshold integrity matters way more than the raw incident count, we have to look at why these incidents are happening in the first place. And the answer lies in a concept defined by scholar James J. Wirtz. He calls it salami tactics. It's basically a method of exploiting ambiguous deterrent situations. An adversary takes these incremental, seemingly minor initiatives, slicing the salami very thinly, to erode the status quo over time. The entire goal here is to act just barely below the perceived red line, specifically to avoid triggering a massive Article 5 response. Moving to Section 3, the deterrence paradox. This builds into something truly fascinating. There's scholarly evidence that completely upends the conventional wisdom. What if these salami tactics are actually a sign of our strength? A rigorous formal modeling study by scholars Gannon, Gartsky, Lindsay, and Schramm found something incredible. They note that Russian gray zone activity appears, in part, to be restrained by NATO's deterrent threat. I mean, this flips the script entirely. Sub-threshold restraint, the very fact that these incidents stay below outright war, is actually proof that NATO's general deterrence is working exactly as it should be. Let me really emphasize what that means for us today. All the drone incursions, the infrastructure probing, the massive cyber attacks. This sub-threshold's conduct is just an adversary's next best option. It's a constrained substitute for open aggression. Russia is engaging in this gray zone activity precisely because a direct military confrontation with NATO remains far too costly. So that rising incident count near the line? It isn't evidence that the line has moved. It's evidence that the line is holding. Section 4. The risk of overcorrecting. But listen, there is a massive institutional risk if we fail to realize this dynamic. When democracies misread the actual intent behind these gray zone tactics, they can literally do more damage to themselves than the adversary ever could. Scholar Maria Melkso outlines what she calls ontological security management. It's this deep institutional anxiety of not knowing exactly where the red line actually is. Defending a democracy against ambiguous threats creates this wild paradox, where the very tools we adopt to manage hybrid threats might actually harm the democratic principles we're trying to protect in the first place. So what does that harm actually look like in practice? Well, when governments panic over a raw incident count, the big risk is reflexive overcorrection. We start seeing permanent expansions of state intelligence powers, severe infringements on individual privacy, and the slow shift toward a permanent war readiness posture. Take Germany, for example. Their recent, incredibly rapid expansion of intelligence powers following just a single drone incident is a live test case of this exact risk. We really have to step back and ask ourselves, is this a proportionate adaptation, or is it democratic overcorrection? Which leads us to Section 5, legal deterrence by denial. Okay, so if panic and overcorrection clearly aren't the answer, what is? We need a targeted, effective solution. Think about it. A chaotic, disorganized fleet of proxies, unflagged vessels, and entirely deniable actors perfectly captures the messy reality of the gray zone. Scholar Richard W. Moss argues that this environment makes traditional military deterrence practically impossible, simply because attribution is so muddy. You can't exactly launch a military strike if you can't definitively prove who attacked you. This level of ambiguity demands a targeted legal response rather than a military one. To solve this, Moss proposes that we use international law to raise the upfront costs of gray zone aggression by treating these incidents as strict legal violations and pursuing rigorous, undeniable attribution. Democracies can essentially pierce the normative shielding that adversaries rely on to hide their actions. It's pretty brilliant. You deter the adversary by completely denying them the ambiguity they desperately need. You hold them legally and economically accountable, all without risking some catastrophic military escalation. Section 6. Securing the Threshold. And this brings us directly to the actionable policy recommendations laid out by the Security Nexus LLC. How do we actually secure the threshold without losing our democratic values in the process? Well, they recommend 4 very specific steps for NATO and its allies. First, we need to evaluate the severity and threshold proximity of incidents, rather than just blindly counting them. Second, aggressively pursue that targeted legal attribution. Third, enhance our domestic infrastructure resilience, so when these probes happen, they fail to cause any real damage. And fourth, ensure allied coordination always maintains strict democratic oversight. This framework really fundamentally changes how we should be reading the daily headlines about hybrid warfare. To dive deeper into this research, the underlying methodologies, and the full policy implications we discussed today, I highly encourage you to visit thesecuritynexus.net to read the complete analysis. I want to leave you with this final thought. There is absolutely going to be another gray zone incident in the news tomorrow, or maybe next week. It's going to happen. But when it does, will we panic over the raw incident count and fall right back into the threshold trap? Or will we pause and measure what truly matters, remembering that as long as these attacks remain in the shadows, the Article 5 threshold is holding firm? Thanks for joining me on this explainer today.